In the intense 97-degree heat of Tehran, massive crowds are rhythmically beating their chests beneath water-misting jets. They are packed into the Grand Masala for what Iranian officials call the biggest state funeral in their history. The logistics required to pull this off are staggering. Over 7 days, the funeral procession is marching through multiple Iranian cities, crossing the border into Iraq for ceremonies in Najaf and Karbala, and returning for a final burial. Local officials project that up to 20 million people will participate across the week. The event commands intense geopolitical attention. Representatives from over 100 countries have flown in, including heads of state like Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and the President of Iraq. The regime has engineered this sprawling cross-border event as a projection of political resilience. It is a calculated display designed to show that the Iranian state remains intact following the assassination of its supreme leader. Yet, out of the projected 20 million people gathering to mourn Ali Khamenei, one specific individual is entirely missing from the ceremonies: his 56-year-old son and Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. In the Islamic Republic, state funerals operate as mandatory political theater. A newly appointed leader skipping a foundational legitimacy-building event of this magnitude breaks every established rule of Iranian succession. This creates a glaring contradiction. The government is staging the largest public gathering in the nation's history, while the man holding the title of supreme leader refuses to be seen. The crisis began on February 28, 2026. A massive airstrike killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei along with several family members and left his son, Mojtaba, severely injured in the debris. Days later, the assembly of experts convened behind closed doors. With zero public deliberation or transparency, they rapidly appointed Mojtaba as the new supreme leader. Because Iran's constitution requires the supreme leader to be a senior Islamic jurist, state-linked media quickly began elevating his clerical title. They retroactively promoted him from Hujjat al-Islam up to Ayatollah to manufacture the religious standing required for the role. But since securing power, the new supreme leader has never shown his face. He has never released a video message, never appeared on live television, and never spoken to the public. The government's explanation for his physical condition relies entirely on a lack of visual evidence. Iran's health ministry spokesman publicly insists Mojtaba only suffered superficial cuts to his head and legs, requiring nothing more than a couple of stitches. Leaked intelligence paints a distinctly worse picture. Foreign outlets and opposition figures report a combination of facial burns, fractured bones, and abdominal trauma requiring multiple surgeries, while unconfirmed rumors suggest he might even be incapacitated. The state's own media apparatus eventually slicked up, publishing a report that referred to Mojtaba using the term Janbaz, a specific honorific strictly reserved for disabled war veterans. By publishing inconsistent claims while simultaneously hiding the patient, the state has struggled to control the narratives. No one outside a tightly sealed inner circle knows if the man at the head of the government is physically capable of ruling. Iranian officials have offered a separate excuse for his absence from the funeral: security. Following direct threats from Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, aides claim active surveillance makes placing Mojtaba in front of a massive crowd an unacceptable assassination risk. Iranian experts propose a simpler secondary motive. Mojtaba has historically operated in the shadows, and analysts suggest he simply lacks the physical stamina or public speaking experience to address large crowds. The timing of the funeral itself adds another layer of suspicion. It took the government over 100 days to even confirm a burial date for his father, a delay fueled by reports that other officials killed in the same strike required DNA testing to identify. Leaving the country without a funeral or a visible leader for 3 full months created an information vacuum. It bred intense public speculation regarding the condition of both the father's remains and the living son. That silence is fueling skepticism inside the country. In several cities, citizens have begun posting satirical missing person notices, using dark humor to mock the state's refusal to disclose their leader's location. For decades, the Islamic Republic has maintained its authority through highly visible religious figures projecting strength from a pulpit. The system relies on leaders delivering public speeches to guide the nation and display their authority. Mojtaba has moved away from this method. He attempts to rule through written proxy statements pushed out by state media and occasional pre-recorded audio clips. Relying on text releases in a system built on religious charisma creates a severe structural vulnerability. A government demanding absolute loyalty from its people faces a difficult challenge when the ruler refuses to face his own citizens. The 7-day event concludes on July 9th with a final burial at the Imam Reza Shrine in Mashhad, one of the holiest sites in Shia Islam and Ali Khamenei's hometown. The government has released a highly detailed schedule for the entire week, yet they have announced no plans for Mojtaba to appear. The question is whether he will finally step into the public eye during these final hours or remain hidden. That question is no longer hypothetical. As of the opening days of the funeral, it has already started playing out, and not in the way state media hoped. On the morning ceremonies began at the Grand Mosalla, temperatures pushed toward 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Water misting fans were installed above the crowd just to keep mourners from collapsing in the heat. The Iranian Health Ministry estimated that around 15 million people would take part in the farewell and funeral ceremonies over the following 2 to 3 days, while local officials elsewhere had floated a number closer to 20 million across the full week. Whichever figure proves accurate, the scale is unlike anything Tehran has organized before, and once again, the man the country is theoretically mourning under, its own supreme leader, was nowhere to be seen. But new reporting suggests this isn't simply Mojtaba choosing to disappear. Iranian sources have told the New York Times that Mojtaba Khamenei personally told officials he wants to attend, but that the request has so far been rejected over fears that Israel could use the appearance to locate or target him. According to that same reporting, he is specifically pushing to be present for his father's burial on July 9th in Mashhad, even if he appears nowhere else during the week. That detail alone reframes the entire mystery. This may not be a leader hiding by choice. It may be a leader who is being hidden by his own state. The threat is not abstract. Days before the funeral, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz publicly stated that Mojtaba Khamenei was marked for death. In response, Iran shut down Tehran's airspace entirely for the funeral procession, and security personnel were seen patrolling the streets in the days leading up to the ceremonies. A former Israeli military intelligence official noted that the presence of other senior officials, like IRGC chief Ahmad Vahidi, may signal that Iran feels confident in its security setup, despite the risks. In other words, everyone else is willing to be seen. The one man whose presence would matter most isn't. Even his personal grief has been kept out of view. Mojtaba reportedly did not attend a memorial held earlier in the week for his wife, who was killed alongside their teenage son and other relatives in the opening strikes of the war, the same strikes that killed his father. A son who could not publicly mourn his own wife and child is now being asked by his own government to somehow embody the strength of a nation. The information vacuum around him hasn't just fueled public speculation, it has reached people who should, in theory, be closest to him. Gholam Ali Haddad Adel, Mojtaba's own father-in-law and a former parliament speaker, said in a television interview that he has had no information about Mojtaba's condition since before the war began and has not seen him. If his own family cannot confirm his condition, what does that say about the rest of the regime? The only official who claims to have met him directly is President Masoud Pezeshkian, who says he held a 2.5-hour in-person meeting with the new supreme leader, but has offered no further detail beyond that claim. Meanwhile, Iran is trying to project the opposite image to the outside world: control, unity, and international legitimacy. Foreign dignitaries have arrived for the funeral, including Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, along with representatives from China and India, and Tehran has issued its own warning outward. Ali Abdullahi, commander of Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, warned the United States and Israel against any miscalculation, promising harsh retaliation for any aggression during the mourning period. That warning lands against a backdrop of renewed diplomatic movement. Trump is set to attend a NATO summit in Turkey on July 7th and 8th, and the Israeli Prime Minister's office confirmed that Netanyahu and Trump agreed by phone to meet in the U.S. in the near future, even as Washington and Tehran remain locked in fragile, indirect negotiations. So, as the procession moves from Tehran toward Qom, across the border into Najaf and Karbala, and finally to Mashhad on July 9th, the real story running underneath the ceremony isn't the funeral itself. It's the empty space where the new supreme leader should be standing. Every day he doesn't appear adds one more day to a question Iran cannot control. Is this a man in hiding or a man being hidden? The scale of this event alone tells its own story. Iranian authorities have prepared for as many as 35 million attendees across the week, a number that, if accurate, would surpass even the historic crowds that gathered for Ayatollah Khamenei's funeral in 1989. Officials from more than 30 countries formally requested to take part, and religious representatives from over 90 nations are expected across the ceremonies. Tehran alone has converted 5,000 mosques and 700 schools into space for pilgrims, pitched 1,000 tents in Malat Park through the Red Crescent, cut hotel rates in half, and put more than 1,000 free cab vans on the road. The funeral's official motto, displayed across the capital, is simple: must rise. But scale like this carries its own danger. In 2020, the funeral of IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani ended in a deadly crowd crush that killed dozens. That memory is now shaping every decision Iranian officials make about crowd control this time, because a tragedy at an event this size, in front of 100 nations, would undercut the very image of strength the regime is trying to build. That image building extends past the ceremonies themselves. IRGC Chief Ahmad Vahidi made a rare appearance beside Khamenei's casket, the first time he's been seen publicly since the war began. Analysts see this as a deliberate signal. Senior figures are willing to show their faces, to stand next to the very casket that proves the assassination succeeded. Every appearance from a lower-ranking official only sharpens the absence of the one man whose presence would matter most. The procession itself is a geopolitical statement as much as a religious one. After Tehran, it moves to Qom on July 7th for prayers at the Jamkaran Mosque. Then, on July 8th, the body crosses into Iraq, landing at Najaf International Airport, where Iraq's own senior officials and religious leaders will hold a formal reception before the casket moves to the Imam Ali Shrine. From there, it travels by helicopter to Karbala, to the shrine of Imam Hussein, before flying back into Iran for the final burial in Mashhad on July 9th. Notably, Baghdad, originally part of the route, was quietly dropped from the schedule, with Iraqi officials citing limited time. For a regime trying to project total control, even a last-minute route change becomes something people notice. Analysts describe what's happening here plainly. Sanam Vakil of Chatham House called it a tightly choreographed display of mourning, continuity, and control. Alex Vatanka of the Middle East Institute went further, calling it a political event dressed up as a religious one, designed to project legitimacy at home and deterrence abroad, and even the economy is being pulled into the narrative. Away from the funeral route, shipping data shows commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz recovering, with over 300 vessels transiting the waterway in a single week, a quiet signal Iran once read alongside the funeral that despite everything, the state still functions. Every layer of this event, the tents, the free Wi-Fi points, the 30-country guest list, the choreography stretching across 2 nations, is built to answer one question that Iran endures. But none of it answers the one question millions inside the country are actually asking. Not whether the state can stage a funeral, whether the man now leading it can be seen at all. That question has actually produced 2 entirely different answers, depending on who you ask. Iran's own health ministry has repeatedly and specifically pushed back against the darker rumors. A spokesman for the ministry stated that Mojtaba was merely knocked down by a blast wave, suffering only slight injuries to his back and kneecap, and that any suggestion he was severely disfigured or gravely wounded is false. According to this version, he was briefly treated at Sina Hospital, received a few stitches on his leg, and was discharged the same day. Officials have gone as far as framing the entire international demand for visual proof as a hostile tactic by Iran's enemies, not a legitimate question. But leaked intelligence assessments tell a very different story. A diplomatic memo based on U.S.-Israeli intelligence, later reviewed by the Times of London, described Mojtaba as being treated in Qom in a severe condition, unconscious, and unable to take part in any decision-making, the first report to publicly reveal his location at all since the war began. The same memo reportedly referenced preparations for a large mausoleum in Qom, built for more than one grave, raising the unsettling possibility that plans were being made not just for his father's burial, but for his as well. Caught between these 2 competing narratives, Iranian state television made an unusual move. It aired a segment showing Mojtaba inside a military command room, studying a map of Israel's Dimona nuclear facility. The footage was later identified as AI-generated. For a regime trying to prove its leader is alive, alert, and in command, releasing fabricated footage arguably did more damage than staying silent would have. Even American officials who take the more moderate view that Mojtaba is alive and functioning, just deliberately unseen, describe the situation as bizarre. One source familiar with U.S. intelligence assessments summed up the confusion by comparing it to a mix of The Wizard of Oz and Weekend at Bernie's, a hidden figure pulling levers from behind a curtain, propped up just enough to look like he's still driving the car. Ali Khamenei, who directs the Iran project at the International Crisis Group, offered a more strategic read. The regime deliberately keeps attributing major decisions to Mojtaba because it gives Iranian negotiators political cover. If a decision proves unpopular, it can be blamed on a leader nobody can question directly because nobody can reach him at all. That confusion isn't just a media curiosity, it has shaped real diplomacy. Ahead of the first round of ceasefire talks in Islamabad, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly reached out to Gulf partners simply to figure out which remaining Iranian officials actually held the authority to negotiate. When the world's most powerful militaries can't agree on who is actually in charge of Iran, the funeral becomes more than a religious event. It becomes the closest thing to a proof of life the international community may ever get, and the stakes behind all of this are enormous. The Pentagon has estimated the cost of the war to the United States alone at approaching $29 billion. Behind every dollar spent and every diplomatic cable sent back and forth is the same unanswered question hanging over the funeral procession, moving through 5 cities across 2 countries this week. Is Iran being led by a recovering man staying hidden by choice? Or is the country's most powerful title currently held by someone who may not even be able to hold it at all?